We will never end climate change without ending white supremacy. That's a quote from Hop Hopkins, a conservationist and director at the Sierra Club, in his article, Racism is Killing the Planet. And that's kind of a weird concept to think about. In recent years, media has covered systemic racism and climate change extensively, but we typically think about them as two disparate issues. Well, today, I'm going to show you just how connected the two issues are and introduce you to a concept you might not be familiar with, environmental racism. Environmental racism is the idea that some communities, specifically minority and low-income communities, are disproportionately affected by climate change. In the remainder of this speech, I'm going to be covering three main points. The first is the importance of addressing environmental racism. The second is the relevancy to it in our daily lives, how it affects people that we know and communities here in Kentucky. The final point will be why it would make a good semester-long project and why it demands our attention. So I've told you what environmental racism is, but why is it important that we address it? We're all familiar with news headlines that prophesy the end of times coming from climate change. And those are good. They call attention to an issue that we need to be paying attention to, but they don't give you the full story. They talk about how we're doing damage to the earth and the ecosystem as a whole, but they don't tell you about the people that are being most affected by climate change on a day-to-day basis. According to a report from San Francisco Health titled "Racism is a Public Health Issue," Black children are 4 times more likely to be admitted to the hospital for asthma compared to non-Hispanic white children. This is due to environmental factors in low-income neighborhoods, such as high sources of pollution. Hop Hopkins, in the aforementioned Sierra Club article, describes these locations as sacrifice zones. The most prominent sacrifice zone is Cancer Alley in Louisiana, which you might have learned about in high school. Hop lovingly refers to Cancer Alley as Death Alley, because so many Black people have died from the poison that drives our extractive economy. The extractive economy that he's talking about in that quote is capitalist America, which quite bluntly doesn't care about the lives of individuals as much as it cares about turning a profit. The media likes to talk about the problem as a whole. They don't discuss the lives that are being permanently affected and altered by climate change. That in and of itself is environmental racism. So why is it relevant to us? It affects people that you know, even if it hasn't affected you, and it affects communities here in Kentucky. Reporter Tom O'Neill covered a 2013 story for Louisville's Courier-Journal, which found that life expectancy within the city varies by as much as 13 years, from 70 in neighborhoods west of downtown to 83 in more affluent eastern areas. Those West End neighborhoods are predominantly populated by people of color. The West End is home to Rubbertown, a place which he calls notorious for its industrial pollution. So I hope that these points have shown you just how extensive the issue of environmental racism is, and that, along with the general lack of information surrounding it, is exactly why I think it deserves to be covered by us for the rest of the semester. It took me 4 or 5 days to find sources that talked about environmental racism directly without mincing words. And I think that the scale of this issue is larger or just as large as any of the other issues that we've covered in class thus far in the semester. Police brutality, systemic racism, and climate change are all receiving a lot of media attention nowadays, but environmental racism isn't. So, in conclusion, we must address environmental racism because thousands, if not millions of people are being affected by it every single day. It's relevant to us because even if you personally haven't been subjected to environmental racism, people you know have, and people in communities near us, such as Rubbertown in Louisville, are literally dying because of the effects of environmental racism. I think it deserves our attention for the rest of the semester because very few people are talking about and covering this subject, and that must change if we hope to end systemic racism and climate change as a whole.